You're probably wondering, Cross, why in the hell is your Suicide Squad review this long? Can't you just say the game is garbage and move the hell on? Fellas, I wish I could, but I needed to see every piece of this game. I needed to see what exactly Rocksteady was presenting to us. And after about 50 hours in this game, all I can tell you guys is that I don't hate it. Now, I'm not in love with it, but I don't hate it. And there have been games in the past where I had to force myself to get over that finish line. But Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League does have some redeeming qualities, some things that have actually pulled me in. And as a gameplay junkie, I have enjoyed certain aspects of this game. And the reason why I bring this up is because I've seen IGN's review, and it's a 5 out of 10. And I'm not saying that it's not a 5 out of 10 game. Granted, I wouldn't give it a 5 out of 10, but how can you score this 5 out of 10, but give Marvel Avengers 6 out of 10? It doesn't make sense to me. This game is substantially better than that game. Now, at the same time, I don't want to take two turds on the sidewalk and compare the two to tell you which one smells slightly better than the other. At the end of the day, though, I needed to give this game a fair shake. I needed to not only get past the story, but I needed to get into Endgame. And that's exactly what we did. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is going to be a game that spawns hundreds of arguments and discussions amongst gamers and really the gaming industry as a whole, and for multiple reasons. First, because of what the game is at its core, which is a live service multiplayer action RPG focus within the DC universe. Now, maybe years ago, back before Crystal Dynamics created the poorly received Marvel's Avengers game, people would have wanted a game like this. The idea of playing as your favorite superhero or villains, kitting them out with skills and loot, and becoming that beast that you've read about in the comics or watched on the big screen. It's a cool idea, really. But we're in 2024 now, and folks are getting tired of live service games. And I know Sony actually pulled back their live service plans, but we just had an article this past week. Live services aren't going away. Now, single player games with intriguing stories and great gameplay that feature superheroes as the main characters have been great in the past, but also in the present. Rocksteady's Arkham games, Insomniac's Spider-Man. We even had a surprise with Guardians of the Galaxy from Studio Eidos Montreal just a couple years ago. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think there's going to be a lot of discussion amongst people who play Suicide Squad, and possibly within Rocksteady themselves, as to whether this game should have been one of those single-player story-driven experiences instead of the looter shooter we ended up getting. And listen, I say this because Suicide Squad is not some amazing game that is captivating the masses, and I believe many people will share that sentiment. And that's gonna leave a lot of folks wondering what could have existed had it let the dying live service trend fall to the wayside. Now, the second reason this game will have its players butting heads is the fact that it does do some things very well. Again, by no means do I think this is a great game. Hell, there were times where I thought this wasn't even a good game, much less a great game, but I don't necessarily think it's a bad game, and not nearly as bad as what folks are portraying this game as. Suicide Squad somehow snuck its way into this super weird middle ground that has me praising it and enjoying parts of it, while also being frustrated and annoyed with other aspects of it, which is why this game is so polarizing. There's a lot of good and a lot of bad, and they're all in the same package. But after 50 hours of playing Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League and experiencing everything Rocksteady is offering here at launch, today we're gonna break down everything about this game, from its story and characters, to its combat and gunplay, to the mission variety and world, and the identity of the game, as well as the end game. Look, say what you want about Anthem, but if Anthem would have just only had some level of end game, it would have survived. But the issue is that everyone in the finance department loves the idea of a live service game until you actually realize what is required to have a successful live service game. It's not just a money printer. You gotta do the things to have people come back and play your game. And a big part of that is, of course, in-game. With all that being said, though, let's begin with the story and characters, as that's gonna be the thing that all of you will first experience if picking up this game. Now, the game starts you off in the shoes of Deadshot, one of the 4 playable characters in your merry band of oddball villains. Off in the distance is the massive hulking skull ship that you'll see floating above Metropolis for the entirety of the game. Now, this starting area is essentially the tutorial where you get to control each character one after the other to learn how their traversal kits work as you make your way to the giant skull in the sky. Not my favorite tutorial, but whatever. Now, once there, the skull creates this huge explosion, and you get hit with this classic black screen with white text, which says 7 days earlier, sending us back to where the story all began, with each character locked up in Argus. Now, keep in mind, they're in prison because they deserve to be. You've probably already seen the Suicide Squad movies, but these are villains, and they're all a little off, quirky in their own ways. And no lie, I actually do like the dialogue between the characters, although at times it does get a little bit old. Now, the game actually has a number of codex entries that you can spend time reading. Think of them as like the lore entries for these characters. Now, everything is being focused on the present and what's to come. The story's premise is very simple. Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League is about you playing as a Suicide Squad to kill the Justice League. There's no spoilers here, guys, but yes, That's the goal of the game. Kill the Justice League. Brainiac has invaded Earth. He's brainwashed the majority of the Justice League, so now they fight for him. He's turning humans into creatures to act as his army, as well as terraforming Earth. And you have the opportunity to play as Harley Quinn, Captain Boomerang, King Shark, or Deadshot, working under Amanda Waller to take down and stop the Justice League and Brainiac. You may be wondering why in the hell they go along with this mission? It's because they got bombs in their head. Again, if you've seen the movies, you know what this is about. But that's the entire plot. Now, I need to mention though, this is one of those games you just don't take that seriously, which I know completely deters from Rocksteady's previous formula. But that's kind of how I treated this game. It's the same way I treated Suicide Squad when I watched it. Hell, 90% of the cutscenes in this game is just funny banter between these group of lunatics, with the remaining 10% being the supporting characters like Amanda Waller, or Rick Flag, or even some of the Justice League characters. And most of the time, it's those characters just telling the Suicide Squad how worthless and powerless they actually are. And this works for about half the story. Again, the comedy, the voice acting. There was like one scene where Amanda Waller was like, "I'm your daddy," and then she proceeds to look at everyone in the squad and say, "I am all your daddies." That was great. No lie, I don't know what it was, but that scene got me. I was cracking up, man. And it also helps that Amanda Waller's VA is the same VA for Sabbathik, which, as you know, we love Sabbathik. Now, the squad themselves are quirky. Boomerang's pretty annoying, which I get tired of. King Shark is actually my favorite. Harley Quinn could be a little bit more unhinged, but I love her voice actress. And Deadshot's Deadshot. But it's the quirkiness of the characters that really does carry this story. Now, that being said, about halfway through, the jokes do start to fall a bit flat. And I think it's just because you're just so used to it at this point. And by the way, guys, I'm about to get into spoiler territory in just a moment if you want to skip to the timestamp. But yes, the second half of the story, you're kind of like, okay, I'm ready to get past the jokes. I'm not saying it's not an enjoyable experience, but it starts to lose its effect on me. But essentially, guys, Brainiac has taken over the Justice League. Flash is still good. Wonder Woman is also still good. And you find yourself up against Green Lantern, with Flash getting smacked down. And then eventually you get 1v4'd by Batman, which was scary as hell, by the way. And there's like no way to make it out of that mission alive. But the only reason why we even made it out is because Flash saved us. But in the process, gets the hell beat out of him and then taken. And because the Suicide Squad didn't pose much of a threat, the Justice League didn't even care about us. Which leaves only Wonder Woman still around, who has not been infected by Brainiac. Now, I actually loved Wonder Woman in this story. There was one point where Wonder Woman actually has to 1v1 Superman. And it is an epic fight. Dude, I was enjoying it. I was like, holy hell, this is going down. My only complaint throughout this entire scene was that our characters just watched. There was one moment there where Wonder Woman and Superman are in a heated fight, and the Suicide Squad is just sitting there watching as she's taking a beating. Now, granted, we would have been shredded in about 2 seconds from Superman, but we pretty much just sat there and watched Wonder Woman get killed. It was a cool fight nonetheless. But essentially, guys, yes, you do find a way to kill every Justice League member. Now, I'm not gonna say that any of it made sense. We put a bunch of like man-made kryptonite crystals from Lex on her head and hair and body, and somehow we were able to take down Superman with kryptonite bullets. The fight with Batman was actually this scene here, where everyone is just high out of their minds on fear gas. And even though it's a cool looking boss fight, the mechanics were nothing crazy, but this boss fight was miles better than the other boss fights, which just essentially boiled down to us running around countershotting, which is a mechanic that Rocksteady has in this game that I absolutely hate. But that was literally the mechanic for Flash and for Superman and even for Green Lantern. It's just countershot after countershot, and it's annoying as hell. But the way the story wraps up is that yes, you do take down Superman, and then you get to take down Brainiac. But, and here's how the live service game works here, there are 13 Brainiacs across the multiverse, and you've only taken down one, which means over the next however many seasons, we will be taking down the other Brainiacs. The only bad part about beating the story, that instead of hearing Batman talk while you're traversing Metropolis, you now gotta listen to Brainiac talk constantly, which has me cutting off my dialogue half the time. Now, was the story bad? I think for Rocksteady fans, yeah, the story is probably pretty bad. But in terms of a live service story, and I hate to even use that excuse because it's like, yo, why can't we just have both? But in terms of like a live service game, it wasn't that bad. But I think you have to be in the right state of mind to even somewhat enjoy this story. And that right state of mind being, hey, this is Suicide Squad. It's over the top humor. And you're either gonna like that humor or you're not. And yes, your favorite Justice League characters will be brutally murdered. Some of them get pissed on. And before people jump up and say, oh my God, I can't believe they pissed on the Justice League. Dude, it's the Suicide Squad. They all got a screw loose. So none of this was really surprising to me. Again, everything is in the delivery, but at the same time, if I had not just recently watched Suicide Squad, I probably would not have liked this story. And it was like watching Suicide Squad got me in the mindset of like, okay, I'm ready for that dumpster fire comedy that I know Suicide Squad brings to the table. Now, with the story out of the way, let's talk combat. Most notably, the gunplay, our movement, and of course our talent trees. One of the biggest hooks in Suicide Squad, and I think most people will agree with this, is its traversal. Moving across Metropolis is something non-stop in this game. The city being so vertical, they had to nail traversal mechanics, and I actually feel like they did. Each character has their own ways of traversal based on gadgets they find early on in the story's opener, besides King Shark, who only steals Riddler's hat for some reason. Harley Quinn uses Batman's grapple on Batwing, Deadshot has a jetpack, Boomerang gets a Speed Force gauntlet, and King Shark can just jump really high. And with that being said, King Shark is actually my favorite. I love his traversal. It's so fluid, guys. I can't express how good movement in this game feels. And everyone's a little different from what I've seen in the chat. Some people really love Harley Quinn's traversal. Some people love the teleportation that Boomerang has, or the jetpacking of Deadshot. All of it is really good. And I feel like more so than the abilities that these characters have, it's their traversal that's gonna make you gravitate toward one character over another. This is the biggest hook of this game though. However, keep in mind, that's just one part of the equation when it comes to gameplay. But I do want to touch on how gameplay works here first. Again, you have the ability to play as any of the 4 characters here, and you're free to swap between any of them at any time in the open world, except when you're in combat or you're already locked into a mission. Matter of fact, the moment you're locked into a mission or combat, your gear and your character are both locked. You cannot swap things. Now, while you're playing as one character, the other 3 will still be playing alongside you as bots. Now, you can also play multiplayer or co-op, which means other people will be playing in your team. And no, there's no like class limitation here. You can have 4 of the same character type. 4 Deadshots, 4 Harley Quinns, it doesn't matter. Now, let me just talk about the co-op experience. No lie, fellas, it was rough. Lots of lags, disconnects. I literally got through an entire in-game mission only for it to crash right when we were trying to get our loot at the end, which resulted in me getting no loot and the mission not even counting. I had to redo the mission. Now, when my friends could play with me, it was fun. And you can imagine when you get in the upper ways of that horde mode, where having people, actual people, not just the bots, play with you would be greatly beneficial. But so far, guys, connection issues and server stability issues were things that were plaguing me in my co-op experience. There were even times where ads wouldn't even spawn in all the way for me, but would spawn in for my teammates. I'm sure these kinks will be worked out, hopefully sooner rather than later. But currently right now, the co-op experience is more frustrating than fun. Now, the game also surprisingly has clan features. Another facet of the game that you wouldn't know even existed because it doesn't even tell you. In the social menu, you can create or join a clan. There's clan ranks, clan leaderboards. You can even get clan rewards that build up as you complete daily and weekly challenges. And there are rewards like rarity-based care packages, bonus XP gains, new clan banners, and much more. This is really solid. And I would argue that Suicide Squad's clan system has more depth to it than Destiny's right now. The problem? At no point does Rocksteady say anything about clans. And sure, you could find it by tabbing through one of your menus, but come on, dude, look at all these menus. Things just kind of run together for me in the menus. What would have been nice though is just like hey, there are clans. These are the social features. These are the potential rewards. This is a small tutorial on how to set this up if you so wish, but none of that was disclosed. I do like the clan features though, especially in combination with the ability to slot your clanmates into your squad as your bots. It's really nice. Now, there's also a hidden feature that lets you replace your bots with your friends or clanmates characters, even if they're offline. Now, this is one of those things that really annoys me about Suicide Squad, because at no point in the entire game does Rocksteady even mention this feature. And it's a great feature. For example, my editor Jared, who's also playing this game, he has a fully kitted out Boomerang with a number of talents and gear that would replace my current low-level Boomerang. So I invite Jared to my clan, and then I drop him into my squad. So even if Jared is offline, bot Jared is still playing with me. And Jared can do the same thing with my King Shark. And again, why this makes this good is that those bots have all of those abilities and all those power-ups and gear, making them substantially stronger, especially if you haven't currently leveled up your other characters. And it's a feature I wish I knew about sooner, but the game never says anything about it. What's even more is that the loot that you obtain while you are playing with your friends' botted characters, they too will also get loot when they come online. Now, I don't know how much loot or even what type of loot, but they get a little bit of something for even being in your team. Now, trust me, we have an entire section of features that Suicide Squad completely completely skipped over. And we're going to get into that here later. But right off the bat, I can tell you from the traversal and the combat itself, the game is fun and addicting, mainly for just how fast and hectic everything is. I know at first glance, the combat looks like there's way too much going on. Way too many screen effects, way too many particle effects, way too many enemies, the insane amount of UI, which I know will drive anyone crazy. And while all of this is true for the entirety of the game, once you start to understand the combat and understand the flow of traversal, get the rhythm of all your abilities, the gameplay really does shine here and becomes a unique blend of non-stop gunplay and movement that play out like action sequences that make you feel like a hero. But there's a lot to learn, and it might take some time to get to that point. Each character has access to a grenade, 3 different weapon types, but can only equip 2 weapons at a time, of which you can swap between mid-combat. You've got shotguns, SMGs, snipers, auto rifles, heavy machine guns, and pistols. But there are limitations. For instance, Boomerang can't use pistols. And obviously, some of these are just locked to certain characters. And of course, you would want to use certain weapon types with certain characters, as the talent trees themselves will buff those weapon types. But all characters have weapon types that they can and can't equip. Now, as far as the gunplay, it feels all right. Again, traversal is the main selling point. Nothing here is screaming like Destiny's weapon feel. Everything is pretty much spammy. Shotguns, snipers, machine guns. They all feel and sound powerful, and they have impact to them. Whereas things like SMGs, auto rifles, they do feel a bit underwhelming. Granted, it's all about how you build into those things. Now, grenades also felt lackluster early on, but then you start to earn crazy grenades. I'm talking grenades that would do like 200,000 damage in a single blast, but it would limit you to like only 1 grenade. But then I found a legendary heavy gun which stated that on crits, it would spawn a grenade that will detonate. And what's so beautiful about this is that it had a 30-second cooldown, but I could throw a grenade and then proceed to shoot my gun. And even if I didn't have a grenade on me, it would spawn a grenade from thin air to then explode. And on top of that, it would scale on my grenade's damage. So I was essentially rocking multiple grenades that were big time damage dealers. I'm talking insta-kill things that would spawn in from this machine gun. So you can start to see some of the build crafting elements here. And this was pretty early on in the game. Now I want to talk about the lackluster side of gameplay. That being the mechanic called countering. Essentially, you were able to counter certain enemies before they snipe you or do hard-hitting attacks. And when done successfully, it stops their attack and stuns them, leaving them more open for a counterattack. Now, there are multiple issues I have with the system. First, there just being so much damn stuff on the screen that it's hard to see the indicator on enemies that lets you know that they are now counterable. Second, when they start targeting bots instead of you, it's difficult to get that counter prompt. And if you miss these indicators and get hit with a heavy damage dealing snipe simply because you've got hundreds of particle effects and screen effects blocking that indicator, it feels bad, guys. Overall, I hate the counter shot mechanic. And what sucks is that throughout the story, pretty much every boss fight against the Justice League, Rocksteady's like, hey, you gotta use nothing but counter shots. And what's even more annoying is that you'll come across missions for the vendors that you need to unlock and upgrade those vendors. Granted, it's one time only, but the mission will include you using nothing but counter shots. Extremely annoying, guys. Personally, I feel like removing counter shots would make combat feel better. It feels like it solely exists to make the already hectic gameplay simply more hectic. I don't like it, guys. That's just my opinion on it. Granted, I doubt it ever gets removed, considering that countering is a part of the campaign. It's a part of how you deal with the Justice League. There's even game talent trees and item perks that Rocksteady would have to pass on those systems if they were to purge countering. But personally, I hate it. I think most of the other gunplay features feel good to play with, but not countering. Now, there's this interesting reload mechanic that we've seen in other games. Anthem had it as well, but it's basically you nailing that perfect reload. When you hit reload and then hit it again while it's still in the green, you'll pretty much do an immediate reload, which is really nice and fantastic for weapons with low reload speed. And this plays into big buffs depending on the gear you have, especially later in the game. Now, even though I wasn't that crazy about gunplay, I do understand it's only a third part of Suicide Squad's gameplay. Where everything really comes together is in combination with the traversal that we talked about, as well as the abilities at your disposal. Everything within Suicide Squad's combat complements each other. You're not gonna have a purely melee build or a purely weapon build. Each facet of combat goes hand in hand with each other in a way that forces you to use everything. Abilities, traversal, melee, gunplay, all of it, and pretty much all the time. Now, abilities come via gaining experience, as well as leveling up and earning talent points to then use on the talent trees. Each character has 3 talent trees, and everything you level up, you get a single point to spend on a specific tree. Now, this just goes left to right, guys, and essentially this talent tree is pretty much on training wheels, which is unfortunate. And the points you earn are locked to a specific tree. So if you think you're gonna like spec out one tree before the other, that's not how this works. It literally just goes in rows. You are forced to spend your first point in the first tree, second point in the second tree, third point in the third tree, so on and so forth. And the cycle repeats repeats itself for every level up to level 30, and you eventually reach the bottom of your tree. But when you understand what I explained a second ago, that each facet of combat is always necessary, then it begins to make sense as to why the game forces you to spec into each talent tree. The idea here is to hit everything. If there were no rules and you completely ignored an entire tree, you'd either have little to no benefits in gunplay, traversal, or meleeing, all of which are equally required to succeed in this game for multiple reasons. The first being your shields. You have a health bar and you also have a shield bar, and you don't take damage to your health until your shields are completely drained. Now, when your shields are low or drained, the main mechanic to replenish them is a melee on a shield harvestable enemy. Enemies become shield harvestable when shot in the legs or hit with certain abilities, but you have to be up close and harvest those shields using a melee hit. Now, this ties your melee directly into survivability. While there are other ways to replenish shields with in-game loot, your melee is weirdly enough your main tool of defense, making it a necessary part of the gameplay loop. There's also some enemies that are immune to weapons, and you have to melee them to break their armor. Now, hitting an enemy with a melee knocks them into the air, which actually guarantees weapon crits. So yes, melee is directly tied into your gunplay as well. Now, about halfway into the game's story, you'll get the ability to apply afflictions to enemies. And these are essentially different elemental types that each have a positive and negative to using them. These afflictions are mainly applied using your melee or your grenades. And simply ignoring afflictions is not something I recommend, guys, as they are very, very powerful and they are a big part of in-game builds. You also have a combat mechanic called combos. It's a pretty straightforward concept and one that you don't really need to pay attention to, as it naturally occurs from just playing the game and being good at combat. But as you attack and as you use melees and use abilities in tandem, you increase your combat count, which appears in the top left corner of your screen. The higher the combo, the better, as it will proc certain effects based on your talents that you choose. And you'll have a number of talents. It's like, yo, you get these benefits when you're above 20 stacks or 30 stacks. So getting these combos and then maintaining those stacks are very beneficial for you. So hopefully you get where I'm coming from here, guys. Every part of Suicide Squad's combat is required and actually enjoyable outside of Countershot for me. With that being said, though, I need you to understand something before you buy this game. You are not gonna have a pure Harley Quinn baseball bat melee build or a pure Deadshot sniper build. I'm sure there are ways you can fully invest in those things and use nothing but those things, depending on the difficulty of the content that you're tackling. But every character really is gonna have to nail down this gameplay loop of melees, weapons, and abilities to succeed, which I know kind of hurts the individuality of the characters themselves if that's what you're purely hoping for, which is why some people have said that it feels like you're kind of doing the same thing on all 4 characters. And it's not that you're doing the same thing, you're just doing the same gameplay loop, but in different ways. Now, this issue is even more evident when you look at the talent trees and the abilities that you unlock. And I was actually bummed out about this. Besides your weapons, grenades, and your melee attacks, each character has 3 abilities in total that you can unlock on your way to level 30. You have your Suicide Strike, which is a high damage single target melee attack that has this cool animation. You have your Traversal ability, which at base is a lower damage attack that hits groups of enemies. Boomerang slows down time and hits enemies in an area with his boomerang. King Shark cannonballs from the sky, etc. Then once you are much further into the game at level 27, you get access to the Squad Ultimate attack, which is like a super ability that slows down time. So everyone has a single target high damage ability, a low damage group ability, and the same exact squad ult. That's it. Combine these essentially identical abilities with the requirement that you use each facet of combat. You've got 4 characters that play exactly the same, with only the difference being their traversal. The rest of the talent tree perks don't help this either, as multiple talents are straight up copy and pasted across each character, or just stat bumps here and there. And I'm not saying that they don't help, but there's not like some other ability that you unlock the further you get into this talent tree. You get your 2 abilities and your ult, and that's it. And to me, guys, that doesn't hold a lot of variety. Granted, Rocksteady can add more stuff in the future, but it almost reminds me of Destiny 2 when it first launched, and we had those locked-in subclasses. It's like the developers don't want us to do things outside of the small parameter that they've given us, which is why I said earlier, guys, the thing that's going to be the deciding factor on which character you choose to play is based on their traversal and their personality. I use King Shark 95% of the game. Jared used Boomerang 95% of the game, and that's because we both like their traversal kits and the characters themselves. Now again, like I mentioned earlier, if I suddenly stop after reaching level 30 and tackling Endgame and suddenly want to get on Deadshot, remember, I now have to level up Deadshot. It's like a whole nother class. Yes, some of the loot that I picked up, I can apply here to Deadshot, but as far as leveling goes, we have to re-level everything. There's no XP sharing amongst your characters. Now I will say the XP is more giving in Endgame, but keep in mind, guys, you do have to level each character individually. The issue with this is when I'm starting to tackle Endgame, the last thing I want to do is get on my dead shot or my boomerang that's under level. I'm just going to stay on King Shark. But that is a way for Rocksteady to extend playtime, for folks to go back in there and tackle each and every one of these characters. Now, there are missions that actually give bonus XP to certain characters. I don't know how much of a bonus, but they do exist. But the missions in the game are an entirely different beast that we need to go over, which takes us to our missions variety and the world itself. Now, after we've touched on some positives about Suicide Squad, this portion here is going to be almost the complete opposite because, my God, mission variation, enemy variation, boss encounters, and the open world in its entirety has problems. All of this is by far the worst part of the game. And if the combat wasn't as fun as it is, I would have given up on it. I literally would have quit this game halfway through. The entire game, and I'm not over-exaggerating here, the entire game is basically 5 different mission types on repeat. Now, if you're one of our Destiny viewers, think 5 public events, but on repeat. All of these missions can be described as kill X enemies so X can happen. Kill enemies so that you can lower the shields of crystals. Kill enemies so that you can rescue hostages and put them in Pokeballs or Powerballs. Kill enemies so the payload can move. Kill enemies to collect data. Kill enemies to spawn more enemies. You start questioning yourself halfway into the game, wondering, is this all there is? And the answer is, yeah, that's it. Even in Endgame. Although the Endgame does have location twists, and there's a mode where you basically just kill stuff for as long as you can, like a straight up horde survival mode, which I very much like. Everything else is the same. Now, how this could pass at Rocksteady, I don't know why. And I'm assuming they're obviously saving those things for when the season begins. But even just 3 hours in, you can start to feel how repetitive things are and the lack of creativity within these missions. They could not be more bare-boned or basic. And yes, I'm saying this as a Destiny 1 veteran player who literally in every mission put a ghost in something and defended them. Even that was more exciting than this. And these mission designs exist as main story missions and as in-game missions, and they never improve. I would argue and say they get worse because Rocksteady's idea of adding variety in these missions is to limit the main fun part of this game, the combat. Tired of doing the mission where you have to kill enemies to rescue civilians? Well, now you could do it again, but instead you can only land crits. That's the only thing that will do damage. Every other type of damage will heal enemies. Accidentally use a grenade? Whoops, you just healed everybody. Not having fun killing enemies to pick up data when they drop? Well, try this mission out where you can do the same thing, but now you can only use your grenades. And our personal favorite mission is where you can only deal damage with counter shots. So you have to just stand around and wait for enemies to attempt to hit you, allowing you to do the counter shots over and over again. Literally making these missions way harder than they should be. Want to make these missions even worse? Why don't you play as a different character? The one that you have no talents or abilities on because there's no shared XP. Guys, there's no defending the mission design here. Look, I love the gameplay. I've praised it. The traversal, the loop, but nothing sucks worse than getting a mission that says, hey, yeah, that loop that you've been perfecting now for however many hours, yeah, don't do any of that. Instead, only do damage this exact way, and anything else will be detrimental to you. If there's any developers out there who want to know what not to do when it comes to mission design, here you go. Now, the only changes in mission design is encounters with the Justice League during the main story. And 80% of those boss fights will have you frustrated either from all the crap that's on the screen that have you almost pass out due to overexposure, or the enemies that move so damn fast that it's infuriating to track them down and deal damage. And every boss fight is centered around the counter, the worst mechanic in the game. You survive, try your best to track the Flash or Superman down as they speed around you, and you just sit there and wait to counter them. Yes, you could do damage with your other weapons, but it's the counter that makes the difference. And eventually you reach a certain threshold and you can start doing damage. Obviously, this is not difficult on lower level difficulties, but I played the highest level difficulty throughout the entire game, and every time I could level up my world tier, I would, because I wanted to be challenged, and my builds were able to handle those challenges. It's when those funky mechanics get put into the game where this is the only way you can deal with this encounter, that's where things started to fall apart for me. Jared and his playthrough literally laughed manically out loud after the fight with Flash was over because he was so pissed off with that encounter. And the Flash is his favorite DC character. These boss fights will make you hate the Justice League. That's how bad they are. Besides Batman, every other boss encounter was awful. All of this critique you can basically copy paste to enemy variety, which is ironically what Rocksteady did with enemy design. You start off going up against simple enemies called grunts and brutes. Think like red bars and orange bars. Tanks and helicopters fall within that same brute category. There's these big guys that do slam attacks over and over when you get close to them. You think the stomp mechanics are crazy in Destiny. Dude, these guys will stomp back to back, like 5 stomps per second. It's crazy. You've got snipers that constantly teleport every time you get close to them, which is really annoying. And the sad part is that all these enemies visually look the same. Now, as you progress through the game and defeat some some of the Justice League, Rocksteady will hit you with its idea of fun variety, giving those enemies residual powers of the Justice League. Now there's versions of small guys that are very annoying because they run very fast, similar to the Flash. The snipers are more annoying because they now have flash electricity shots that disable all of your traversals and abilities. Helicopters are covered in Green Lantern armor and can summon extra turrets somehow. Now how these enemies got these, I have no idea. But let me just say, even with this, enemy variety is bad. Combat's good, enemy variety, terrible. But get used to it because you're gonna be absolutely destroying thousands upon thousands of this copy-pasted garbage. Now, before we move on to loot and endgame, I wanna touch on the open world Metropolis. Because you can move so fast and also travel so fast in this game, the open world can feel small. Not only that, it's also completely void of any reason to explore. There's nothing to really find here. If you're not in a mission and just speeding across rooftops, you'll come across basic enemies to kill, loot bugs that explode in loot, and resource bugs that explode in resources, and way too many Riddler-themed things. Now, while the resource and loot bugs are nice, and the Riddler stuff is alright, I know it gives you cosmetics and some lore stuff, nothing is really pushing you to explore the world. And on top of that, there's really nothing to explore. It just seemed like a lot of busy work. Another thing that sucks while you're exploring the world is the constant dialogue. From Brainiac to Riddler, the radio communication in this game never stops. Unless you're standing still or you mute your dialogue, which sucks because I actually don't want to mute my squad. I like Harley's outbursts every now and then when we're in the middle of fights. I'm just tired of hearing the non-stop radio communication from these other characters. One thing I liked about Diablo in this world was that not only was the world large, but you would come across dungeons that you could jump into and it felt like another world, another thing to explore. And my experience with Suicide Squad, there was none of that, which made the world feel very flat. Now this brings us to a big chunky portion of this video, loot and endgame. We've got a lot to talk about in this section. This is a looter shooter, so loot must be a key factor and it must be done well. Now does Suicide Squad do loot well? Fortunately, there's not a simple answer to that question. Just like the rest of the game, it does some things right and also does some things wrong. Now let me get the basics out of the way. Your gear slots include 2 weapons, your melee weapon, a grenade, a shield mod, traversal mod, neck bomb mod, and a lucky charm. So you've got a good amount of slots to customize and a good variety of equipment to loot. There are also gear rarity tiers, 7 in total, all of them having an associated color like all looter games have. You've got white, green, blue, purple, then yellow, which is legendary, then pink, which is notorious gear, and then red, which is infamy gear. Now each escalating tier comes with more gear augments. Legendaries have a legendary perk, notorious are villain themed, so they come with a unique power related to certain villains, and infamy gear sets are set items. Now the more pieces of a set that you have equipped, the more benefits you get, and it adds completely new mechanics to the combat that's exciting, and it allows you to work it into builds. There's also a really neat secret mechanic that happens when you experiment with equipping different notorious and infamy gear sets together. Some combinations will unlock new synergies that only unlock when you have said pieces equipped. And this is a fantastic idea because it breeds experimentation. Yes, you can look up these combinations online, but personally I think it's really cool to be rewarded for tinkering around with the loot system. And suddenly you'll find yourself equipping different notorious sets and different infamy sets together and unlocking an entirely different trait and perk that you didn't even know existed. Now let's talk about obtaining the loot. There are loot drops in this game, like when you kill a loot bug or sometimes a random enemy that will drop an item. But the majority of your loot comes from after mission reports. You finish a mission, then the game cuts to a menu where it delivers your rewards, and here you can look at your new loot, look at the XP and resource gains. You can also look at enemy kills and other stats, and then once you exit that menu, you're back in the open world. And we need to petition the gaming industry to stop doing this nonsense. Anthem did it with its notorious loading screens, and even though it's not like this crazy loading screen, it is present here with Suicide Squad. Now you may be wondering, why is this even here? What is the purpose of this? Why do I have to see my shark sitting in a kiddie pool? It's because you can buy emotes and animations for this screen. You see where I'm going with this, guys? Money. This is for money. You want your character to look cool right before you get your loot? Boom. Go buy it from the store. Now with all that being said, the loot experience throughout the entirety of the game's story, and again, this is just my opinion, is pointless. Because you're still leveling up and you don't have access to a full talent tree, and because the game throws legendary loot at you very early on, making everything from greens, blues, and purples instant salvage, loot is pointless, at least in the story. Now, not all legendaries are game-changing, but they all have an extra unique perk that ties to their name. For example, the bullet-propelled grenade legendary perk can roll on all weapon types. So you can get a legendary weapon called the fully loaded bullet-propelled grenade, which is a shotgun. But you can also get the precise bullet-propelled grenade, which is a pistol with the same legendary perk. That being that weapon we mentioned earlier, where critical hits spawn a live grenade that deals 100% more damage. When you have access to legendary loot that have these bonuses, you don't want to replace them with lower rarity items. In most loot-based games, you would eventually replace them because you would find lower rarity gear that does more damage or even give better stats. But that's not the case in this game. Gear does not level up when you level up. I literally used the same weapons throughout the entire game, pretty much from start to finish, never finding one that did more damage, even though we leveled all the way up to 30 and we had access to what we thought were going to be level 30 gear. The game is giving us legendaries early on, which completely removes the reason for lower rarities to even exist. They quickly become items you dismantle, so you can get the color associated resource that you ended up needing for any in-game crafting or tinkering with that you want to do for your gear. Now, the way damage values on weapons work is that they all seem to have a static small range that they can roll. So no matter when you find a certain weapon, it's guaranteed to fall within the same damage range. The only thing that increases damage is the augments that rolls on the gear. For my Destiny 2 players, think static rolls, fellas. Yes, you've got augments, and these are percentage increases, and they have a variety of benefits, but there's nothing crazy changing about the weapon. On top of that, once you open up crafting, you can literally just go make or apply whatever augment you want to that particular weapon. This is not good for a looter shooter. Something we pointed out in our original preview of this game. Now, you'll be able to unlock vendors as you progress through the game's main story. Each vendor has specific missions for you to do that will give them increased functionality and unlock more options. You'll be able to craft and overhaul weapons at one vendor, and completing missions for this vendor will unlock crafting recipes for different gear, including a few legendaries. You can also do something called overhauling, which will randomize every augment tied to said item. There's another vendor that unlocks the ability to add afflictions to your melee weapons and your grenades. And you start out with ice, but completing further missions will unlock other elements and allow you to increase the duration these afflictions have. The third vendor lets you re-roll a single specific augment. So let's say you have increased ammo reserves on a gun and you want to change that to something else. You can re-roll that specific augment over and over again until you get what you want. Now, doing this locks the other augments, so you can only pick one to re-roll. Eventually though, you can finish all the missions for this vendor and you unlock the ability to elite items. Eliting will let you re-roll all augments infinitely as long as you have the resources. Or you can use a feature called totes to just add exactly the augment you want without having to rely on RNG. So really, once you find the gear you want, you can elite it, turn into exactly what you want with the exact perks, which removes all reason to care about RNG drops. Now, this feature is definitely tailored to in-game because the resources you need to use totes is relatively high. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing, but again, considering how many seasons Rocksteady wants this game to last, static rolls for weapons will never work for my looter diehards out there. Now, there's also two other people you could do missions for that add a layer onto the game, although these aren't physical vendors. There's missions that unlock the ability to fine-tune each individual stat on certain weapons. This is called nano enhancement. The more missions you complete, the less time it takes to earn points to use to fully max out each weapon stats. These stats are accuracy, stability, reload speed, and magazine size, and you get these points over time just by using a weapon. Lastly, there's a mission that unlocks contracts for you to undertake. These are very small tasks that you can do as you play without even thinking about them. They give you various rewards like resources, XP, currency, and you can undergo more contracts at once by completing contract associated missions. Now, besides your two weapons, your melee weapon and grenade, some of the other gear slots do focus on providing other unique benefits. The shield mod dictates how much shield capacity you have, how much shield you get back per pickup, and your shield harvest chance, as well as the shield overcharge. Your traversal mod increases your traversal attack. It dictates the rate at which you can gain traversal attack resource. The neck bomb and lucky charm gear slots are just for random extra augments and perks, and they don't have a specific identity. Now, once you get into in-game, your build does begin to play a part slightly more than it does in the early game. This is solely because you're actively getting rarer gear that comes with more interesting and game-changing perks that enable you to actually put a build together. Before the end game, all you really have is boring talent tree buffs and a few legendary items that come with fun perks, but nothing to completely center a build around. The end game provides you with exactly the same missions you've been playing all this time, except they grow infinitely tougher and grant you notorious and infamy rarity gear. There's really not a lot to in-game though, but it's a lot to process and the game doesn't explain it well. So here's a breakdown of how in-game works. Before you fight Brainiac and complete the available story so far, you're going to be required to earn a new currency called Promethium. This currency is gained from doing those same repeated missions that we've talked about. You then spend Promethium to fight Brainiac during the story, and then spend it on tougher in-game missions called incursions that you can scale the difficulty of to increase rewards and earn infamy set gear. Incursion missions look different on the map. map. It's a little X icon, and each mission lets you individually adjust the difficulty before you start it. The difficulty is completely separate from the base game difficulty that you can change in the squad menu. Now here's a pro tip about difficulty. When you start the game, play at the hardest difficulty if you can. It really isn't all that hard, but if you do it, it gives you bonus XP and resources. But you also work towards unlocking more difficulties the more XP you gain in the highest available difficulty. So if you start the game on sweating bullets difficulty, you'll be able to unlock the invasion level difficulties much quicker. The invasion level 2 difficulty gives you the chance to earn master level loot and more legendary recipes for crafting. And invasion level 3 unlocks the ability to earn new legendary items. So it's well worth it to progress to these higher difficulties as fast as you can. The game never tells you any of this unless you go and change the difficulty during the game. Just another very important thing that the game doesn't explain well. Aside from this base difficulty, all in-game missions have you select between the regular 3 difficulties and eventually master difficulties. In order to unlock mastery difficulties, you have to complete each of the incursion missions on the hardest difficulty you have available. Incursions are essentially missions you've done before, but more difficult in terms of how much damage enemies deal to you, how much damage enemies take before they die, as well as the weather and additional modifiers. When you're viewing the mission, you'll be able to see the brief according to the difficulty you have selected. You have extreme weather that will be impacting the mission. This is like lightning storms that can strike you. You'll have varying amounts of enemy ranks that will spawn, as well as a certain number of random modifiers that will make your mission harder or easier. Now, the potential modifiers and other information on these missions can actually be viewed within this mission select menu by pressing E on a keyboard or right trigger on a controller. This will open up a glossary, which will explain everything you can potentially be going up against. You're also able to see the rewards you'll get from completing these missions. Now, once you progress into mastery level 1 through 10, the Bane's range infamy set items will be added to the loot pool, and each incursion tells you which Bane's rage item they drop when you hover over them on the map. So if you're targeting the Bane's rage SMG called Death Rattle, you want to run the mission that has the higher chance of dropping the Bane's Rage's firearms. Some of the Bane set's items add completely new buffs to your gameplay loop. And once you equip 3 items from a set, you'll get access to actual game-changing perks that can really change the combat around you and allow you to solidify an actual build for the first time in the game. Now, as you complete higher and higher mastery levels of incursions, you'll grow your Finite Crisis rank. Once you hit Finite Crisis rank 30, you'll gain access to the tier 2 version of Bane's infamy set, which is stronger than tier 1. Then again, at Crisis rank 60, you'll gain access to tier 3 versions of the set, which is the strongest gear in the game. Now, the end game isn't all just repeated missions. There is a new mission called Killing Time that you unlock at Finite Crisis rank 10. This is essentially a time-based arena where you're just killing enemies endlessly. You start out on the easiest difficulty, and as you kill enemies, the difficulty will rise and you will gain extra time. Higher difficulty levels will introduce mutators, extreme weather, and much more. This mode can go on for ages though, and you could find yourself in here for well over an hour, if not more, depending on your build. High as I made it was like rank 22, and yes, things start to scale very quickly. Everything becomes so much harder, and this is the mode to test you in every way, to say, hey, do you got the build to go all the way to mastery level 50, which I can only imagine how difficult things get up there. Now, obviously, you would do much better in this game mode if you have a squad of friends, and this is where actually pulling your clan mates or your squad mates are going to be extremely beneficial for you here. You can also choose to play this on standard or hardcore. In standard, deaths will deduct time, but you have infinite revives, while hardcore has 0 revives. Even if one team member goes down, you lose. Now, we did both, and I went to the same wave both in standard and hardcore, and the loot seemed to be purely RNG. Matter of fact, standard gave me better loot. As far as I know, I think hardcore mainly exists for leaderboards, but this mode, just in general, just even the standard version, seems to be the best way to get notorious gear, as the other in-game missions are about acquiring infamy sets. Either way, using the in-game infamy gear in combination with notorious gear and legendary items is where the build crafting in this game comes into play, as you're actually able to see things start to work together. And those things matter because the game is always increasing in difficulty. Jared has a one-shot grenade build that acts like a mini missile. The trade-off is you basically play with no shields. So he built in the shield regeneration as well as grenade ammo spawn. This playstyle is interesting because he's using boomerang, using that speed to get in, throw a grenade, and then dip out. My build with Shark is an affliction build, and everything I have here is boosting my affliction damage, from craze and venom to the burn damage that I apply with my heavy weapon. I've got an item that buffs my affliction damage substantially. I'm talking crazy high percentages. Builds are fun in this game. It's just a shame that the talent trees are so limited. It's also a shame that there isn't any type of like random rolling on weapons. I know augments kind of count as random rolls, but it's not anything that changes one weapon weapon over another. I feel like the depth here could have been crazy for Suicide Squad. And honestly, I feel like the bones are actually good. But keep in mind, Anthem also had good bones. And we saw what happened in that game, which takes us to the roadmap. Maybe we will see a version of Suicide Squad that has more depth when the game starts in its live service roadmap, which actually isn't set to begin until March. Now, the timetable here is a bit weird, and I think the live service features and new content should drop like a week after the game has been out versus an entire month. The problem with that is I don't know who's going to be playing this game a month from now. I don't think there's enough content, and certainly not enough mission variety to keep people around that long. The combat is fun, very fun, I might add. The loot chase at the end game can be addicting until we, of course, run out of loot, but there isn't enough variation right now. It's 4 missions on repeat over and over again. I can't see myself doing that for another couple of days, let alone another month. Maybe people will set the game down for a month and come back, but lots of games release in a month's time. I'd argue Rocksteady should utilize the momentum that they have right now with the launch of this game and release new content ASAP if it's ready. Season 1 of this new content includes the Joker as a completely playable character, new boss fights and enemy variants, which the game desperately needs, a new playable Joker-themed environments, activities, and something called Strongholds, new episodes, and new DC villain-themed weapons and gear. If this content released next week, I would actually play it. But a month from now, I don't know, guys. It just depends on what we're already pulled into. Hell, I barely escaped Power World to play this. Now, they have multiple seasons that they are planning to release, which will include 3 more playable characters, 3 new environments, more weapons, more theme gear sets, more activities, and even mid-season updates. But that's quite a ways away, and we'll see how that first season even goes. All right, let's quickly jump on the monetization here. How is Rocksteady funding all these seasons and all the extra content? Well, as far as we know, seasons are currently supposed to be free, but there will be a premium battle pass that you can pay for each season. The only money you can spend on this game currently is within the microtransaction store. And really, it's just your typical cash grabby stuff. There's outfit bundles for each character that range from $10 to a whopping $25. You've got emotes and the after mission animations that we talked about earlier, which all cost around $5. And there's a coming soon section in the store that's apparently going to sell banners. Now, no lie, some of the outfits look cool, miles better than what you would get from the Riddler challenges. But are they $25 cool? That's a tough one, guys. Again, I have dropped $20 on skins before, most notably in Destiny. Dude, they dropped that Witcher set. I couldn't help myself. I needed it on my time. But that may be the one and only time I will ever drop that much money on a single armor set. These though, I don't know. Maybe if I played this game every single day and I absolutely loved it and the drip really mattered to me because I'm seeing my character constantly, then maybe I could justify that cost. But $25, that's a lot of money. But that's essentially how they're planning to fund future seasons. At the end of the day, guys, I think Suicide Squad is a game that is very good in some ways, but very bad in others. The story has its ups early on, but they're soon followed with downs as you get fatigued with the non-stop, jokey nature of the story and absolutely terrible boss fights. Combat and Traversal are 10 out of 10 for me once you get used to them and master the flow, but all of that gets knocked down a peg when you realize there's 0 mission variety throughout the entire game. Loot and talent trees are unexciting until you hit the end game, where you finally start to see interesting and powerful build-defining gears that make you go back and reselect different perks on the talent trees to better optimize your gameplay loop. Even though the talent trees would be miles better if they were actually filled with talent and ability options versus just percentage increases and stat buffs. Endgame is actually good because the loot in the combat do finally end up on the same level of excitement for me. However, there is a limit to how long we'll be chasing the loot without true random rolls. But one single new in-game mission to change up the horrendous activity variety isn't enough to keep me or most people around for the month that we're going to be forced to wait for that content. Every positive thing I have to say about Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League has a negative waiting right behind it, which makes me question whether or not it should have even been this kind of game to begin with. Would Suicide Squad have been better as a story-driven action game, similar to how they've done with their past Arkham games? I think most people would argue yes, and that seems to be the popular take amongst reviewers of this game. But I can't deny the fact the game is fun. The gameplay is addicting, but they need something to make a big splash. Destiny would have died had it not had Vault of Glass. That is what saved Destiny for many of us. The moment we realized that this game was more than just us running around shooting aliens. Now we got raids in a first-person shooter. Holy hell. Suicide Squad is going to have to bring us something of that nature, something on that level, but we'll see if they do. Well, guys, that is our review here for Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. Yes, this is a very long video. I wanted to completely review it, and I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below, though, what you think of it. Are you going to stick around for Season 1, or are you just waiting to see this game fizzle out? Fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.